Hi, and welcome to the Land Pioneers podcast, where we get to meet some of the most prominent land developers in Australia. Listen to the gems and learn from the experience of these giants. And today's guest is Luke Noonan from Noonan Watts. Welcome, Luke.
Thanks for having me.
So I met Luke probably about 8 or so years ago while he was at National Pacific as a senior development manager. And just while we were working together on a project called Elliston, I was just really impressed with the attention to detail and leadership and how he was just managing the whole process. I was keen to learn more. So just a little bit about Luke. He's had a pretty extraordinary career spanning more than 20 years in land development. He's an RMIT and a Victoria University graduate. He began his career at Dennis Family Corporation, where he worked for almost 6 years as a project director, setting the foundation for subsequent leadership positions. He then took on an even more challenging role as a position of a general manager of residential land at MAB, and from there on moved across to National Pacific in 2014, where such major projects as Elliston, where we worked together and included a town centre and a school and an industrial area. And over the last 10 or so years, Luke's been independently working with land developments, founding Noonan Watts, where he continues to impact the industry through advisory services, development, and project management. So a little bit about our sponsor today, and the podcast is brought to you by Eagle Vision, where we're your trusted partners in property development, driven by a commitment to transparency, a straightforward process, and a deep passion for helping our clients create sustainable legacies that will endure for generations to come. So some of the 3 whys for a land developer to work with Eagle Vision and where we may be a good fit: less is more, 24/7, and no surprises. So less is more, strategy and experience, having a background in property development, the strategy of effective 3D visuals we feel is the most important component, and it takes priority over everything else. And after nearly 700 projects completed in over 15 years of operation, we're pretty confident in what we create. 24/7, so our team being based in Australia and Europe, we work on a 24-hour turnaround to increase pace for our clients and their projects, and ultimately no surprises. We pride ourselves on transparency in operation, where we've built systems and processes to involve our clients at every step of the way. They get to see the inner workings of the machine and can track the progress of their projects intimately. We're constantly thinking of new ideas and experimenting on these, and in order to ensure the best return on their investment, such as interactive master plans for large-scale communities, track and analyze buyer behavior, and utilize data for informed decision-making, such as which lots are attracting the most interest. Experience the future today. Visit us at eaglevision.com.au to discover a world of possibilities. And now back to our guest. So, Luke, if you want to maybe share a little bit about your journey and how you started and how that all sort of shaped to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So very early days, I started at what's now called Melbourne Water, but back then it was called the Melbourne and Metropolitan Board of Works, and started my career there. And it gave me an opportunity to study as well as be in the workplace at the same time. So I was able to do my study part-time, working almost full-time, but they were very supportive in that. So that gave me a great insight to support what I was learning in civil engineering. And they allowed me to grow my knowledge very quickly. You learn stuff at university and you're doing what you're doing, but to see it on the ground, see it in practice is really key, I think. So, early days I was there, and then did a little bit of a stint in local government, and then followed on to private practice, and then working for developers. And my consultancy now is Noonan Watts with my partner, Simon Watts.
Very cool. And so what did you take, I suppose, out of that local government and knowing probably the other side in some ways, to then bring that across into the development world?
Well, as they say, when you leave government side, you're moving to the dark side, but neither is good nor bad. So you have people working very hard, whether it be in local government or state government, trying to do the best they can. When you're on the other side, you don't understand how technically difficult it can be for them to go through processes. I have that insight, so I probably show a little bit more patience because I understand the constraints that they have. The Local Government Act, for example, can tie their hands a bit in things that they can and can't do. Same with the Planning Act. And so it gave me a really great insight to know what sort of questions to be pushing hard on and what to throw in as I'd like to get this through, but I'm not going to die in the ditch over it sort of thing.
Yeah, because you clearly have an idea of their constraints and what they're working with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm curious to know, so back in the early days working with companies like Dennis Corporation, what was it like? Bert Dennis is an icon of the industry.
It was a terrific place to work. The amount of knowledge you can gain from someone who's an industry icon, Bert Dennis, you can't measure that. And so it was challenging at times, but it was awesome. The 6 years I was there was very, very enjoyable because you're not just working with the owner of the business, you're working with his family as well. And he taught me some really key principles around how you present yourself, how you think about spending your money on the things you need to deliver. Always talk to me about think as if the money's coming out of your own pocket before you spend it. And if you don't want to buy something with the money you've got, well, maybe the cost of that piece of infrastructure needs to be revisited to see if we can get it in a more efficient and affordable manner. So I was really good in that sense, and I built a little team up there as well. So we all got the same experience.
Very cool. And did you happen to then take that team along? How did that part work?
Yeah, so I've been pretty fortunate that I don't know what it is, but I tend to gel with people pretty easily. So once I've got a rapport with people and I'm getting to know them, I can take them on the journey quite well, help them be the best they can be, because if they're the best they can be, that's going to make me look good at the end of the day. So it's all about mentoring, taking them down a pathway where they can maximize their own personal growth. And therefore, it's better for the project, better for the business, better for me.
Yeah. And industry changes, there are always events that happen that are a little bit unpredictable. So perhaps having that teamwork environment was something that you used.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to be able to understand the changing environment around you and rally the troops. There might be a part of the team that's going through a tough time because of something that's changed. Sales have dropped, whatever it might be. You need the rest of the team, whether it be the construction team or whatever, to help get around them and encourage them and make sure that they're not on their own, because sometimes it can be a little bit isolating in land development because everyone sticks to their silo. I'm sales, I'm construction, I'm planning. I would much rather everyone talking to each other and sharing their experiences and supporting each other when someone's got a problem.
Yeah. And have you been able to overcome some of these silo sort of situations?
Oh, absolutely. Once everyone gets to know each other and everyone is understanding of what's going on around them, that's the important bit. My role would always be to make sure everyone's aware that what's going on in the broader team. And, once everyone's on board, it works really, really well.
How did you handle, like, for example, we've had the GFC and COVID and all these sort of major events that have disrupted the industry. So, how did you find your approach handling this?
There's been quite a few over the last 20 years, for example. We had the pre-GST rush when everyone thought all the houses were going to become super expensive. So a lot of people bought ahead of time. So we've dragged the market forward. So then we had to have the first homeowners grants to try and pull more people forward. All we're doing is pulling sales forward all the time with these sorts of initiatives. So you've just got to help work with people to help work their way through the challenges of that. But then when you mention the GFC, it's an interesting one. The GFC, we were affected in a way, but in terms of my experience, land sales were still there. As long as the financial institution that the purchasers were using was stable through that time, you could still make some sales and still eventually get them to settle. I think the challenge became at a corporate level, who the organisations were financed with. And if they were using overseas financiers, Bank of Scotland as an example, it was tough. It was tough. And that brought on one of the biggest challenges I reckon I've had in my whole career. I got a phone call. I was working for a company, Queensland-based, and managing the team down here in Melbourne, and I get the phone call at a function. So-and-so project, I need you to sell it. Oh, that's a shame. We've got planning permits in place, all those sorts of things. Yeah, no worries. Let me get onto it. And said, and you need to sell it and have it settled by June 30. Now, this phone call was on the first week of June. So I'm thinking, June 30 the following year, great. I've got 12 months to get this done. No, I had 3 weeks.
Wow.
So we had to find a willing purchaser, had to work through the contractual arrangements and then get the cash in the door before June 30. But because June 30 was on a Sunday that year, it was actually the Friday, the 28th, that we had to get it settled by. So that was fun. And that brought on a lot of, I wouldn't say stress, but just a bit of tension through the team, because everyone knew everyone was under the pump trying to get information together and help the purchaser do their due diligence as quickly as they could. Because whilst we had planning permits in place, we didn't have any construction approvals or anything of that nature. So I'll look back at that and I go, I'll never do that again.
And just so for our listeners, I suppose, what was the sort of the scope or the scale of this particular project?
It was a 600 lot subdivision.
Wow.
So there's a fair bit of due diligence to do in that and to get it settled. But it's interestingly enough, the people that we sold it to, they got under duress during the GFC. So I ended up selling it to one of the big developers. I think it might be Stockland at the time. It's now a thriving little community, which is great. It's what you want to see. But it just goes to show that even back then, people would look at things and say, yeah, I think I can buy this. They don't know what's around the corner for them either. And, so as it goes on, they ended up having to sell it as well.
Yeah, look, this industry seems to have that nature of being fairly fluid, and when things get thrown at, like GFC, like all these different situations, you just have to be able to handle it.
You do. You've got to be adaptive. You've got to be ready to roll with the punches and at times be disappointed. Like, for example, it was disappointing for me to have to move on a project, but it was best for the company.
Yeah, I understand. All right, so switching gears a little bit. So there are a lot of moving pieces to projects. You've got construction, there's sales, there's marketing, there's planning, there's all kinds of things. Is there a way to balance these to create these sort of successful outcomes?
Quite often I use a cake mix analogy.
Right.
You've got your marketing position of the type of project you want to achieve. Just like when you're making a cake, you want a chocolate cake, you put so much of this in, so much of that in. For the type of project you're wanting to create, how much effort do you put into the marketing? How much do you focus purely on just straight up engineering and create your lots and get in and out. If you're wanting to create a higher quality project, then you'll add things to it like improved parks, better streetscapes, higher housing controls, all those sorts of things. And then you get the product at the end is how you've mixed it all together to produce a product for the end user, the purchaser.
Interesting. And so when it comes to just sort of diving deeper a little bit into it, all these consultants, perhaps some of them you've worked with before, some you haven't, how do you know that they're the right sort of consultant for the cake mix?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. We're lucky in Victoria because a lot of the key players have been around for a long time. There's not many inexperienced civil engineers, inexperienced town planners. They're all been doing similar stuff to ourselves for some years. So it would be rare that they didn't work. The thing is, you have to make sure they're just working well together. And I like to have a bit of competitive pressure within teams. For example, if there was a company that offered planning, design, and construction and landscape, I'd only give them one or two of those disciplines. Bring in another consultant to provide one or two of the other ones. So there's a bit of tension there that I've got to get this done by X date so that I don't let the other organisation in the team down. They've got a deadline. I need to get my things done before the deadline.
Yeah, because quite often, like you mentioned, some of these really well-established players, there might be a tendency to get complacent.
Yeah, well, that's right. And the big guys get really busy. And if you've got all your eggs in the one basket with the big companies and they get really busy, through no fault of their own, things just seem to take a little bit longer. So
some things might fall through the cracks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So just keeping that little bit of tension in the team without being strong-arming or anything like that, it just keeps things ticking over quite nicely.
Yeah. Do you let the consultants set milestones and deadlines, or do you sort of force these yourself?
We create the program, we create the objectives on behalf of our clients. They have input 100%, but I'm not going to allow a discipline, whether it be landscape or town planning or engineering, drive the whole program if it doesn't suit the objectives of the overall project.
Have you had things happen when a particular consultant said, no, we actually can't deliver by XYZ date?
Oh, quite often they'll say that, and then you just talk them through it. They get a little bit nervous about it's going to take a fair bit of resourcing, and they haven't necessarily got those resources available today. They might have them available next week. So you just got to talk it through with them. Well, okay, if you don't think you can do it, what can we do? What can we move around? What can we do to make this work in an earliest possible time frame?
Yeah, very cool. So moving on a little bit onto Noonan Watts. So You've had quite a diverse experience across a range of large corporates. What inspired you to create your own?
Well, Simon and I have known each other for a while. In fact, his former boss tried to headhunt me. And through that, we had a connection. We've sort of kept in touch. And then one day, it would have been, I think it was September 2019, he said to me, I want to do something. Do you want to do something with me? And so away we went. And that's how it all started.
And then 2020 comes COVID.
Yeah.
And that changes things quite dramatically, I imagine.
We did have the oh dear moment where we said, what have we done? But we just pushed on. And it was actually quite good because it helped us set up how we want to go about things. We set up our systems but we also were able to focus on some things that other people weren't focusing on. So we have a project now in Strathfieldsaye, just outside of Bendigo. Been on the market for sale as a broadacre sale for a number of years, and everyone who looked at it found it too hard. Well, we just had the time and the energy to de-risk the whole project and put it to one of our clients, and we now have a planning permit for it. We're in design for stage one. So, those things, because we're nimble, we can look at those sorts of things and be committed to resolving the issues. And on that particular project, it was mainly environmental issues. So we just had the time.
Yeah. Yeah, look, Winston Churchill said, never waste a good crisis.
Yes, indeed.
So these are the opportunities when maybe some of the existing players were caught unaware and unprepared, and you were far more agile.
Mm. Yeah. So, and you learn a lot through those processes. Well, actually, you can challenge certain things. Like the item that was driving the whole problem for the project was an overlaying master plan that the council had for the broader area and wanting certain things to be done, like unmade roads to be built and all the rest of it. But we were able to convince council, no, don't build the unmade road. Let's bring that through the middle of the site. That way, all the native vegetation, we can connect to a couple of hectare native vegetation conservation reserve on the other side. So you've got all this connectivity, and environmentally that's much better, and we're not taking out more trees and et cetera. And that was part of the selling point of our planning permit, for want of a description. So council got on board, and then we just had to work our way through with the authorities, and away we go.
Yeah. And council couldn't see this before you proposed this idea?
I don't think it had been put to them, and I don't think it's with the amount of work they've got on at the time, I don't think they had the ability to sort of think outside the square like that. But they're quite happy when we put it to them. Building is road it had.
I'm sure the local residents. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess now that we're talking about environment, and it's become quite a hot topic with lots of developers looking to create more environmentally sensitive projects. How are you seeing that side of it develop?
All these things everyone's happy to do, but not at any cost. It has to be at the right cost. And sometimes the objectives behind a lot of things override trying to keep housing affordable. So, when you're putting on extra stars on houses, or if you're bringing in third pipe schemes, in other words, recycled water for people to use on their gardens, all those things, they're terrific. Fully support them. But there is a cost component. And at the end of the day, in certain markets, it's easy. The price of the land or the price of the house may have to go up a little bit, but the end package price people are still comfortable with. But there are locations where the package price sort of has a ceiling because of the location. It might be a bit further out from town, all those sorts of things. And you can't always do what they want to do because you can't do these developments for nothing. You have to be able
ultimately, the client, somebody pays for it, right?
Oh, that's right, yeah. And the more cost you put into projects, the more the end user, that's the mum and dad purchaser, whether it be second home buyer or a first home buyer, doesn't matter. They're the ones that pay. And it's all about trying to keep the package price as affordable as we can.
Yeah. I'm sure it's quite a unique challenge, especially for projects like Strathfieldsaye, where the price there is probably doesn't have quite as much room as maybe something that's in urban in Melbourne. So,
so your price points are lower. Your construction costs aren't much different. So your margin is not as great. Therefore, each thing that gets added, can we just do this? Can we just add that? The margins get diminished. And that's not in anyone's interest, because you want developers to have profitable projects so that they can do the next one and the one after that, because we're all about trying to provide housing for our growing communities.
Of course. And look, when we're talking about some of the projects that you've worked on, you've dealt with quite a few that have combined residential and industrial and commercial aspects. So projects like Maryfield, how did you find like a practical way of doing something like this?
In essence, Maryfield, if I use that as the example, whilst we talked about it as being a 24-hour city, and you could live, work and play in the same space, essentially it was 3 projects in one. We had the residential start off first. We then started focusing on the industrial, and then worked on the commercial precinct in between. So that whilst they are very distinctly different projects, you still have to have an overarching view on a few things. Your marketing needs to talk to each other. You can't have in my view, if you want to sell a 24-hour city, you've got to make sure that the residential marketing documentation is talking to the industrial and to the commercial, etc. But also you need to take a big picture approach to delivering the key infrastructure items. Water, outfall sewers. And in that particular case, there was no gas within a bull's roar of the site. Had to come from a long way down to the east towards Wollert. And so we had to tap into the major gas main. So you think about all those sort of things. There's a lot of cost involved, and you've got to look at how the timing of pulling all those things together then impacts on the individual 3 precincts.
Yeah, because the program has to sort of cater for, all right, so we've sold some land to somebody that wants to hopefully build their own little warehouse and operate their business from there, whilst at the same time there's a mum and dad that down the road are going to be living in their future home for the next 10 years.
And it was, it's going back a while now, but Maryfield is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. But early days, it looked like we might have to put the houses on, if they wanted to have gas appliances, be on gas bottles. And that in the market's just not acceptable.
Of course, and nowadays there's no more gas to some of the projects completely.
So it's gone full circle in 10 years.
That's it. So looking back over some of that time, what are some of the projects that then stand out for their sort of unique aspects of them?
I've always got a soft spot for one. That's the Hunt Club in Cranbourne. It was interesting at the time. I'm talking 23 years ago. It was on the east side of Cranbourne. The only other project of any scale or quality was on the west side. That was being done by Pete & Cohen at the time. So we were effectively competing with each other, but we're on opposite sides of town. That was the first project, the Hunt Club, to start bringing amenity into the Cranbourne East area. So we were spending a lot of money on parks, a lot of money on entry features, putting in design guidelines, having community days, doing all those sorts of things, and started community grants out there. That was the first project I think Bert Dennis had that had community grants going on, where you provide funds to local not-for-profit organisations to help them further their endeavours. So I look back at that one quite fondly, not just for those reasons, but it was also the first project Dennis family won a UDI award for. So that was pretty cool.
That was a nice little stamp of approval, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, very cool. All right. And so now that we've gone across some of the projects, what about some of the challenging projects aside from the one that, you had to sell within 3 weeks? Were any of those within that space?
Every project has its uniqueness and its challenges. I think the biggest issue I'm finding at the moment over the last 4 or 5 years aren't necessarily the projects themselves, but I'm finding there's too much focus at the front end of sales, thinking that then the delivery fixes itself. And quite often, if you haven't put the hard work in at the pre-sales stage to know what your risks are with the delivery, you can end up in a world of hurt. Going back over the years, you'd have sales contracts that would have a sunset clause, and it's 2 years under the Act, right? That's easy. Never, ever in my time until the last 5 years have I seen that be an issue. Now, you've even seen contracts that are amending the standard provisions of the Act and changing that from 2 years to 3 years to give people enough time to deliver on the civil infrastructure. And I think part of that comes from the fact that not enough work's been done in the due diligence side of purchase of the broadacres. If they knew what the constraints are at that point, it could be a lot more smooth. But at the end of the day, there's a solution for everything. It's just a matter of whether it's going to cost you more.
But don't developers have to be a little bit, not gung-ho, that's probably not the right word, but optimistic to actually take on some of these major projects because they're huge risks?
Good point, but if you've done reasonable amount of due diligence early, you'll be able to make a balanced decision on those risks. I'm seeing on some projects, I don't think that's ever been taken into account. And then before you know it, they've got issues with getting access to the neighbouring project next door to connect to services and things of that nature. Yeah.
So they're taking on risks that they shouldn't be necessarily taking on.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, got it. All right. And so how about, there's this big theme, the housing crisis and affordability, which you've touched on earlier. Do you see any ways whether the government perhaps or the private side can work towards resolving this issue?
I think, to be honest, both sides work as best they can together. And I think a key player in that is obviously the UDIA and the Property Council. But what I am seeing at the moment, a lot of wise heads on the government side have moved on to other parts in their career or maybe even retired if so be. And there's not enough experience on the government side, whether it be at the servicing agencies or approval agencies, to understand how the development side operates. Instead of being the big bad developer, if they had an insight onto how we operated, they'd realise that we are trying to do the same thing. And I think there needs to be a program in place to support the new people coming through on the government side to learn more about the fundamentals. I had a discussion with someone senior at Melbourne Water only a couple of weeks ago about that very point. I said, staff are terrific. They're trying hard. They're doing everything they possibly can. But if they understood more about how we went about things, that might help them go, if I only needed to do this, then we could keep this thing moving along, So the challenges are there, but time will tell when it improves. But to the UDIA and Melbourne Water's credit, if I use that as an example, they had a very good session 2 weeks ago where they're able to share what they're doing to help resolve backlogs and things of that nature.
Yeah. So is it about alignment? Yeah. Is it about like senior people aligning with, obviously, from the opposite side and having those kind of regular sessions?
Level, the alignment is there.
Right.
I
Okay.
think it's the coal
Like
face where
experience
the
of the
younger
junior.
ones are doing the real work. They may not be as aware of what time pressures are and things of that nature, or what the process after they've done their bit that the developer needs to go through to do the next bit. And if everyone was just on the same page from a knowledge point of view, I think it would be a lot easier for all.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. And so how about Noonan Watts? So you're obviously quite invested in this venture right now. What kind of a legacy would you like to create for Noonan Watts to sort of leave on the industry?
Well, I'm hoping not to have to leave a legacy too soon. But Simon and I are very proud of what we've built over the last few years. We are doing our best to try and help our clients achieve their goals. That's the first thing. Want to be known as an organisation that achieves the objectives for their clients. But also, we can educate our clients about how to go about things in a more sensible, efficient, proactive manner. That's what we want to do. And then when we do pull up stumps and we pass it on to someone else, that at least the organisation has a reputation for doing not just a good job, but doing the right job. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the world of property developers is quite small, so that reputation is the key, it seems, that you're creating.
I always say in Melbourne, it's all about maintaining and building relationships. It's not about the deal.
Yeah. And you've been through quite a few different organizations to know which ones work better than some of the others.
I've seen listed companies, I've seen privately owned companies, government agencies. So, I've seen it all. That sounds
Cool.
bad.
All right. Look, 20 odd years or 30 years in the industry, you tend to collect a few stories, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Very good. Look, that's all that we sort of wanted to cover in this chat, I suppose. And any other parting words from you?
Oh, look, I think my only desire is to make sure we all get through this year productively, with good health, and we don't listen to the doomsdayers. Like I was listening to the radio this morning, and now they're talking about, well, we're not in a recession, we're in a individual recession, trying to look at the growth of individual people is going backwards rather than the country. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. That's just negativity we don't need. So we ignore the negativity, let's move on and be patient and positive.
Very cool. All right. Look, thanks so much for your insights. Really appreciate you sharing them and sharing your journey on the Land Pioneers podcast today. And so for the listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to the Land Pioneers podcast, where we interview some of the most prominent land developers in the industry. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us here. So we'd also obviously love to hear your thoughts, and remember to rate and share the podcast if you found it of interest. And click subscribe when you're there so you don't miss an episode. Thanks again and have a fabulous day.